Welcome to Story Unboxed, a horror podcast on the craft of writing. I am Michael David Wilson. I'm joined as always by my co-host Bob Pastorella, and today we have our guest co-host Neil McRobert of Talking Scared Podcast. How are you doing, Neil?
I'm very well. We're all in different time zones here, so I'm the late night guy today, and as I said, I've been moving boxes all day. It's kind of hard at the coal face. I've been moving boxes to help somebody move house. I'm pretty tired, so forgive me if I start talking nonsense at any point in the next hour.
Well, that is a malady that I am permanently affected by, and I mean both being tired and talking nonsense. So don't you worry about that. Bob, how are you doing?
I am doing good, man. Trying to stay out of the heat. It is fucking hot. Let's just say that. But I'm doing great, man. I'm ready and freshened up on session 9, and we are ready to roll.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, regular listeners know that we spoil the shit out of every movie or short story that we analyze here. So, there's your warning. We are going to go spoiler deep. We are going to talk all about the film, all about the story lessons and takeaways. But I mean, to begin with both of you, when was your first experience with Session 9? Do you remember when you first saw it? Do you remember why you first saw it? Because particularly back in the day, it was quite cult film, quite a
Mhm.
niche. So it wasn't really like you were going to go to your regular cinema and there it was. So I mean, shall we start with you, Neil? When did you first see Session 9?
So I do have a memory of this because I wasn't aware of it at all. So it came out in 2001 to a kind of critical thud. And then I saw it in 2011, so a full 10 years after it came out. I'd never heard of it at all. And I was writing a sort of academic conference paper on the role of asylums in American horror and American urban legend. So I was casting around for different stories, different tellings, some of which we'll probably talk about today. And I kept coming up and butting up against this reference to this film, Session 9. And so I remember I had to sort of pre-streaming, really. I had to hunt down an import DVD, which is always exciting when you get it and it's got a foreign stamp on it. And then I
Yeah.
remember watching it in my little tiny flat in Glasgow and just being mesmerized by it because I'd expected it to be one kind of film and it was something completely different, completely and utterly different. And it scared me in a way that I've been scared more, but it scared me in a way that is unique to only a very few films. And then I wrote all about it in my conference paper, and I've loved it ever since, really. And it's a film that when people say to me, like, recommend a horror film I may not have seen, this is one of two that I always recommend.
What is the other film? I
Well, it's
mean,
there you go. The other one is a film that I often think of it as a sort of automatic double header, and I don't really know why. I think it's a tonal thing. But the other one is Late Mungo. I think they both unnerve in a very similar way.
yeah, and they're both independent, they're both
Yeah.
quite niche. They both play a lot with location, like that's
Mhm.
kind of part of the terror in both of them.
Yeah, and they're about dread. I think
Yes.
they're both about dread rather than jump scares or even they're about dread more than they are about fear. I
Yeah.
think, which is a bit of a pompous thing to say, but few films. I mean, we can talk on a blow by blow about certain key scenes, but few films fill me with the sense of dread and disquiet that Session 9 fills me with.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. Well, before we dive deep, then let's turn it over to Bob. When did you first watch Session 9 and how did you hear about it?
I think I'd heard about it through like the trade magazines and stuff like that. But I avoided it for a long time because I'm was not a big fan of David Caruso, and sorry, just that's just the truth of it. And I believe that my interest in it probably came from Facebook. And I want to say, and I may be wrong, but I want to say that Gemma Files was talking about it
That makes
from
sense.
Facebook, and I got interested in it. And of course, I probably I was like, okay, so I probably need to check this film out one day. I don't know when. And so this is definitely at years after it came out. So I'm probably like you, Neil. I probably didn't see it till probably 10 years after it came out. Maybe a little bit before, maybe a little bit after. But I think what really kind of spurred my interest in it was finding out about the actual location, Danvers, in Danvers Hospital, and which has a history beyond, before Session 9 and since after that. So it's I think a lot of that tied into it, but the thing that made me watch it was seeing a picture of the hallway with the wheelchair. And there's something about an empty wheelchair, and it's probably from the Changeling, those scenes in there that has really affected me. It's playing Silent Hill. When they go into the hospital scenes and there's wheelchair in there, those scenes creep me out like really bad. And I don't know why I have a fear or get a feeling of apprehension seeing an empty wheelchair, except especially one that can move on its own. That really scares me, or fills me with anxiety. And so, it's probably stemming from the Changeling and all that. But I decided I was going to watch it, and I got it on DVD and watched it, and had probably a couple friends over, which of course they didn't. A few of them just didn't get it. But it blew my mind. Um, and and I've seen it many times since then. I watched it again last night, and that was probably about maybe the sixth or seventh time I've seen it. And every time I watch it, I see something different, which is usually the case with a really good film. You can't see everything, at one time. And so you catch things, and revelations come to you and things like that. So, but it is definitely in the top tiers of my favorite films, including in any genre. So it's just really it has a very it affects me. It affects people in different ways, but it affects me, and I love it.
So I didn't expect that I would have seen it the earliest, because I saw it a number of years later. I first saw it in 2008, but it looks like that means I saw it before both of you. And the way that it came onto my radar is the way that actually quite a number of books and films have. I am a huge Silent Hill fan, so I just periodically will search for things like films like Silent Hill, books like Silent Hill, anything that tangentially has that atmosphere or can evoke that dread. And so, of course, during one of these searches, Session 9 came up. And I mean, as soon as you see that shot of the wheelchair, that just has Silent Hill all over it. So I thought, right, I've absolutely got to check this out. And I mean, going down the rabbit hole further, the hospital in Silent Hill 3 is based on Danvers State Mental Hospital. So there is a solid connection there. But yeah, I watched it with one of my friends from university back in the day, and I just felt this absolute dread and this quiet and just so unsettled. I do think it is the nearest to evoking the dread that I have playing Silent Hill in a movie format. Like much more than the Silent Hill film adaptations themselves,
Uh-huh.
more than Jacob's Ladder, because I think Jacob's Ladder, it has elements of that, but then it has, I guess, quieter, more conventional filmic moments whereas throughout session 9 the dread is sustained throughout. There is no real respite, even when you've got shots in the bar or that are away from the Danvers. I guess they're so fleeting that you've still got the feeling kind of consuming you because you haven't stepped away for long enough. And then that brings me to the rewatching. So I rewatched it yesterday, and that's the only time that I've rewatched it. So I've now only seen session 9 twice, and the reason is that it made such a powerful impression the first time. I didn't want to spoil it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes when you rewatch or you reread something, it's not as good as you remembered it. But it was possibly better, which felt like an impossible task. Like I'd built it up so much in my mind, but I think coming to this, over a decade later, and perhaps with all the knowledge that I now have about horror films and horror books, and like I'm noticing things on other levels and the way that they've crafted this story. And yeah, I'm just consumed, filled with session 9 dread right now.
I think it's a film that possibly more than any horror film I can think of. Maybe The Shining, although I hate that movie, but The Shining, because there are very few jump scares, it doesn't get old. It's not like it's not like a ride where you know what's coming next. I think session 9 is like that because there are no jump scares. There are no moment. There's no like clanging drum and then the cat jumps out of the cupboard. It's just slow, palpitating dread. But when you watch it again, it's no longer a mystery. So you can watch it in the full knowledge of the horror of what you're really seeing. So in some ways, it might even get scarier when you rewatch it.
Yeah, I got to ask, why do you hate The Shining? And I know
Well, I mean
that's a massive
that's
tangent.
a whole other podcast. But I mean, this is going to basically get me no extra followers from your listeners, is it? But I think it's a monumental failure as both an adaptation and a horror movie, which I know is sacrilege. It's never scared me. I watched it the first time when I was about 13. It's never scared me. A lot of the reasons I don't like that film are kind of cliches now because they're the reasons that King doesn't like the films. I always just feel like I'm repeating what he thinks, but I genuinely do think it. And I could list you a million things. The whole thing about Jack Nicholson is mad at the start. He's reading Playboy, blah blah blah, all that stuff that is lore. But the reason I really don't like it is the book, for anyone who's read it, hinges on love. And it's a warm book. Yeah, it's set in the winter, but it's a warm book that's full of warmth and emotion. And it ends in heat. It ends with an explosion. It ends with fire. And the fact that Kubrick took it and makes the book end in with ice, I think is emblematic of what he did to the story. He takes out everything that matters. That's just, yeah. I won't go on about it because I could talk for hours about the problems of that film, but he excavates that story of anything that matters.
Yeah, I think that is a separate podcast,
Yeah.
in fact, and
Mm-hmm.
it could be an interesting one to do. I don't know if everyone would just leave it feeling frustrated, but I
Yeah.
think there's an interesting discussion to be had. And I can imagine, yeah, if you go into The Shining looking for a straight adaptation of the text, then you are going to be monumentally disappointed and probably angry. So, I mean, not just with The Shining, but with any adaptation, I try to take it as like, look, this is a separate piece of art. This is a cover song. This is riffing on the
Yeah.
themes. And I mean that the same could of course be said in a sense for Flanagan's the Haunting of Hill House. If you look for a straight adaptation, then you're going to be disappointed. Now, the difference with Flanagan's Haunting of Hill House is, he doesn't do something like kind of change warmth for coldness. That
Yeah.
thematically and tonally, it's there. It's just a kind of
Yeah. I
modern.
think it. I think it's fine to riff on a story. I think it's sometimes essential to riff on a story. But I think when you fundamentally miss the point of a story, that's no longer an adaptive choice. That's failing to grasp the story you're trying to tell. And I know these are strong opinions, and it's fine if people love The Shining. That's fine. I am in the tiny minority. I'm aware of this.
Yeah, I
But
would assume, from what I know about Kubrick, that he probably didn't miss the point, but he knew the point and decided to take it in a different direction. But we probably have to go through archival interviews and footage with Kubrick. But this is a fascinating discussion and a fascinating rabbit hole to go down at some point. Probably not the point where the episode is advertised as session
no.
9.
Well, to bring it back, I would say that I think session 9. I mean, I have a whole theory about this, but I think session 9 is part of a continuum. I think that, like, The Shining is a retelling, or perhaps that's the wrong phrase. The Shining is a riff. It's an extension of The Haunting of Hill House, which you just mentioned. And it's interesting that we're mentioning these texts in the same
Yeah.
context, because The Haunting of Hill House establishes this idea of a place that is inherently bad and it will damage the people who go there. And The Shining is the same story. I mean, even
Yeah.
I think The Shining even starts with an epigram from Hill House, I think. And I think that session 9 is again the same story. It's about a place that is inherently dangerous. And if you go there, it will take all of your problems and it will take all of the mess and murk inside you and it will exploit it. So I think they're basically, all the three films we've talked about are different tellings of the same nucleus of a story. That's a very, very, very American story. Yeah, that's why I love this film so much. I basically think it's doing what The Shining is trying to do, but better.
Yeah. Yeah. I have two directions that I could take this in. And like I'm reluctant to do the one that then brings it back further comments on The Shining. So
I
let's
will not say
park.
anything more now about The Shining. I'm done. I will say
I
nothing
mean,
more about
we
it.
might have to, because of it being, as you say, part of that lineage. But I want to talk about Simon. I feel that this is heading in that direction, and there's a number of interpretations as to who or what Simon is. Whether Simon is just part of Mary and one of the personalities, or whether Simon is, for want of a better word, like a demonic entity that has been around far before Mary, or is Simon something else entirely? So let's talk about how we interpret Simon. I don't know. Do you want to kick that one off, Bob?
Well, I think a lot of it, because Simon comes in at the very beginning. We don't know it's Simon, but we know that that Gordon's obviously going through something, And so the main character Gordon needs his job really really bad. They basically need this work. And the Anderson's done such a great job of complete misdirection of this, that this is textbook. And I'm gonna come back to this later on when we talk about takeaways. But we experienced Simon, and we at the time that we first experienced Simon, we don't know if that's something in Gordon's head. We don't know if that's something that is another presence. We don't know. There's an ambiguity there. Another story note, that we don't know. One of the interpretations that people come up with, and I'm probably going to say it wrong, but it is the genus loci, which basically like a protective entity of a place. That could be a thing that Simon is. There's so many things. Once we realize who Simon is and we recognize that voice, which by the way, IMDb has no listing of who
I
did the
love that.
voice.
I love that
Yeah,
fact.
there's no voice. I mean, shit, it could have been fucking Larry Fessenden for all we know. But there's no record of it. But that, and to me, that's fucking creepy on its own. So we don't know even who that was. The thing with Simon is that he puts a focus on the dread in the anticipation as the story goes on. And once we find out who his voice is, it allows the story to go in a different direction than what we initially thought it would go. And I love that. And it's like, if you could put that into a book, that's storytelling gold right there, But in a film, it works perfectly, because there's so many things going on as things start to build up and we start to find out who Simon is, and it just spins it. It's like, whoop, here's another trajectory that you didn't think about. And that's, to me, that's what I love about it. What Simon is, though, is I think it's a matter of personal interpretation of what you come away with on the film. I don't think that there's a clear cut answer, and I think that's the greatest thing in the world, that there's not an answer to what or who are what it is. We don't know. That's my thoughts on it. I wish I could be a little bit more concrete than that, but I mean, it's so loose. There's like, as soon as you start trying to think it into a concrete direction, it falls apart.
Do you want me to come in?
Yeah, please.
So I have a habit sometimes of pointing out logical flaws in stories and then realizing I'm the idiot and I've misunderstood something. So perhaps you can correct me on something. But the whole thing about genius loci and the idea that Simon is in some way the malevolent genius loci of Danvers, I don't understand how that works. Are we going full spoiler here so I can talk about the reveals and what? Yeah, okay. So I don't get how that works, because one, Mary Hobbs, who for a long time we think Simon may be one of her personalities, she has done awful things that has landed her in Danvers back in the 1970s. So if he is a spirit of Danvers, how did he get into her or influence her to commit the crimes before she got there? Similarly, with Gordon, who was, we find out, basically killed his wife, his dog, and the entire team. He's killed his wife before he starts the job. So how was Simon influenced him to do that, which is the implication we're supposed to take? Now, am I right in that? As he killed his wife before he starts the job?
Well, I thought there was ambiguity there, because I thought there was a possibility that he'd started the job, and then, when he'd gone home, he'd brought the bouquet of flowers, and then he murders them. I didn't.
So yeah, that would make sense, right? That would make sense to the genius loci. But I mean, either way, I think I personally choose to think he is some kind of existential demonic presence rather than just aspects of Mary Hobbs's mind, because it makes it scarier, quite frankly. And there is the line you said, Bobby, it takes it in a different direction. Right at the end, and it almost makes me think of those great stories like Roald Dahl, those amazing stories where they would literally hinge on a last line that is almost a pun and it recontextualizes everything you've read up to that point. I love stories like that. Sometimes they can seem a bit cheap, but I love them, where everything you think you know spins in the last line. And the last line of this film may be my favorite line in all of horror cinema. And it's simply when someone finally says, Simon, explain yourself. And he says, I live in the weak and the wounded, Doc. And the implication being that if you have a weakness, he is some kind of demon that will exploit it. And I'm I mean, I've said this ad infinitum on all my shows, but I am terrified of the demonic possession trope. So it makes the film scarier for me if I land on that side of things rather than it being some kind of split personality that Mary has.
Yeah. Just to understand your fear, is demonic possession something that you believe is possible in reality?
Well, this is the thing I talk about an awful lot because I think I really want to understand my own brain, because I'm the kind of annoying atheist that you don't want to meet at a party, or I used to be. I used to be that kind of really obnoxious atheist who had nothing but contempt for any kind of spiritual leanings. And I've mellowed as I've got older. I've stopped being quite such a prick. But I still would consider myself emphatically an atheist. But I'm terrified of the notion of demonic possession. Not because I think it's real. If anyone has ever listened to my shows, I apologize for making you listen to this again. But what terrifies me is I have all sorts of like anxiety problems, intrusive thoughts, blah 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 blah, and I'm terrified. What frightens me is the idea that you don't need to be possessed; you just have to think you are, and it does the same damage. And you get into things like Analyse, Michelle, and the ex Emily Rose, and that stuff where it's like, is it mental health? Is it possession? Does it matter at the end of the day? Because if your brain breaks to that extent that you think something is in you, then that is in itself terrifying. So I don't like to really even touch the genre because I'm always worried that it will kind of infect my intrusive thoughts in some way when I'm on a low ebb. I'm fine, people, but when I get stressed, I can get quite wacky, magical thinking, intrusive thoughts. I really don't want that in the arsenal of my brain turning against itself. So I kind of shy away from the trope. But in this film, it kind of makes me smile because it's such a neat finish. It's such a neat twist right at the end that it kind of delights me.
Yeah.
There's another wrinkle because if we're talking about the genus loci, and it's something that I noticed, and I really didn't get concrete on it until last night, and it's mentioned at the beginning of the film, and so I went on a little rabbit hole to see if maybe I'm being stupid, but there is a theory, and I believe this theory, and it just kind of adds another wrinkle. At the beginning of the film, it's mentioned that when Danvers closed in like 85, 86, that they just basically sent a lot of the patients patients out into the streets. And there's a theory, and I think that this could possibly be the case, that Gordon was one of those inmates, so he would have already been infected.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
So he would have already been infected by whatever's going on. And to go back to what you were saying, Neil, the thing, and I think I mentioned this before, the occult, I've had people say, man, the reading about the occult's not very scary. I said, here's the thing with the occult. Nothing has to happen. If character believes that something has happened, that is where the horror comes from. You don't even have to see it. But to me, some of the scariest stuff, the things that make things, when the character walks in, and I'm gonna be a really simplified example, but it's like the prophecy has been fulfilled. What the fuck are you even talking about? And then shit happens that could be real or not, then you're like going, oh shit, man, whatever they did worked, and that's scary.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's scary. And that's, we don't know what this demon has done. We can only see the aftermath of what its infection has done to these people. If Gordon was a patient previously, let out on the streets, built himself up, started a company and things like that, then he could have already been infected. And
that's a great idea. I like that.
And the more I think about it, it's like, man, dude, he could have been let out in that age. Because he's the right age. It all makes sense. And and can we just say that Peter Mullen's probably one of our greatest.
Oh,
and he's just so fucking good, man.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
No, I mean, watching it, I did think that there was a lot that is pointing to Gordy having been an inmate before. Just like some of these lines, and telling us that, like, that a lot of them return. It just felt like this is what's happening here. So
this had completely passed me by. Yeah, this is kind of entirely new ground for me, considering this.
Yeah, and I mean, what I love about Simon is the absolute ambiguity, and the fact that we're not given a conclusive answer. But I mean, I think, I live in the weak and the wounded. It's the suggestion that we all have the capacity for Simon to infect us. So I don't see Simon as a demon that jumps from one person or one thing to the next. I think Simon can infect any of us at any given time. And so we could all simultaneously be infected. I mean, yeah, like Simon is almost a stand-in for what happens when you completely lose it. You completely lose your connection and on and with reality.
Yeah.
There's
another wonderful line. A line that I think is scarier than The Weak and the Wounded, but doesn't get as much press, is on one of the tapes when the doctor says he's talking to Mary, but he's talking to Simon, and he says, "Why did you do it, Simon?" And Simon replies, "Because Mary let me. They always do."
Yeah.
And that gives me chills.
Yeah.
They always do. Like,
right.
What has he done, and how many times has he done this?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's a specific answer. Why do you do it? The doctor's dealing with Mary.
Yeah.
Mary let me. They always do. Is and I've heard that line, but now that you bring it out, it's like, Jesus.
Yeah, there's so much history in that line, right? You always get the sense this thing goes back to kind of, the Bible. That it's like it goes back to BC, whatever. It's just such a sense of weight and just that the accretion of horror in that line over there. Yeah, I love it. That line scares the shit out of me.
Wow.
Yeah, and those two lines together, if you're weak, if you're wounded, then Simon will come in, but ultimately you are complicit because you're the one who has to allow Simon in and to commit these acts in the first place. So what a combination.
Well, it kind of ties into our modern concept of evil, because we've with the rise of psychology, we so the contemporary boogeyman, Bundy or Gacy or Ed Gein or people like that, like, we no longer think of these people as evil in a biblical sense. We think of them as damaged, and like even the fact that that there's so many serial killers have got prefrontal cortex damage, for example, and there is an element to which you get the sense that this is almost not against their will, but they haven't chosen to be this way. So that line, the weak and the wounded, it even works on that level. So normally the demonic thing is kind of a biblical, Manichean black and white, good and evil. But I live in the weak and the wounded. It really fits for a contemporary idea of why bad people do the things they do, because they are weak and they are wounded and they're trying to fill a void inside themselves. So it works both ways.
Yeah. And talking about rewatching and looking at the foreshadowing of potentially Gordy having been an inmate before. I mean, I made a note when, he's begging to get this job, and he says, "I really need the job." And there was something about the way that he delivered it that I thought, I feel there's something more than money going on here. It's like, I need to go back. I need to be in the Danvers. So I mean, when you watch it again, and we're probably all going to rewatch it, imminently, having now discussed it and looking for these other things. But I got the sense from the way that it was delivered that it's like this is about more than money. And I mean, that's why he's so pushy. It's like, I'll do it in 3 weeks. I'll do it in 2 weeks. I'll do it in 1 week. That then I think in the end, like, it maybe ends up like 6 days or something for the for the kind of $10,000 bonus. And if it was just about money, you get the sense that there's other ways that he could make this money. There are other jobs that he could take. It's not like this is like a real big payout. I mean, the opposite, in fact. He's trying to compete so that he gets it, and he'll do the lowest price. He'll do the quickest time. So I feel
Yeah, right.
there's
Why
a
does he want to be
reason.
there? Why does he want
Yeah.
to be there so bad? Yeah, you're quite right.
Yeah. And I mean, regular people, you you look at the Danvers and it's like, do I really need that job? No, thanks. I'd rather not. Which I mean leads us into that the Danvers as a location is of course a character, but then I mean, I don't know if you've dug much into interviews with the cast or just the lore of the film,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of actors that, I mean, they're saying that the filming there, it was not it was not a good time. There was unease throughout. I mean, even in terms of where they filmed, like, I mean, David Caruso said that they really were only filming in a limited section of the asylum because much of it was unsafe for shooting. But there's also been interviews with Peter Mullins where he said that he got to the top of the roof and he felt an overwhelming urge to jump, as if there were voices telling him to jump. So in a way, it's as if these actors, whilst they were on set, were feeling a presence, were feeling infected by the Danvers itself. And I mean, these things are obviously always fascinating, and this is why we have endless discussions about, like, look, is there an entity, or is this mental health? Because you can go to a place, you can feel unease, but is it because there's more to the place than we're aware of, or is it simply like all our experiences and media that has led us to feel like that there's an atmosphere?
Well, a few things about that. First of all, I read a thing. Now, how much this is true, I don't know, but I read a thing that David Caruso claims he saw a ghost while he was there, that he saw a figure walk past a doorway when he was shooting in the medical building. And he says he didn't tell anybody because he didn't want people to look at him funny. Now, you always think with stuff like that, is that just a good story because of the context, but or did he really see it? You know, but I don't let me end this conversation without telling you my mum's story, because my mum was a psychiatric nurse and she worked in a very, very old institution in the north of England. And she has a really great creepy story, which I can tell you.
What shall we just segue to it now? Let's not bury the lead. Let's just do it.
I didn't want to derail the chat. Okay, so right, in brief, there's some logistics to this to understand the story, but I'll be as clear as I can. So my mum worked in geriatric long-term care for years. I mean, she was like head of the ward. I don't really know the terminology. And Prestwich Hospital near Manchester is a really old Victorian-built Danvers style. It had the kind of Kirkbride building bat-wing layout that Danvers has. I'm a bit of a Danvers nerd, and she worked there in the 70s and the 80s, so it'd been there 100 years, whatever, and it hadn't really changed, right? The architecture, it still looked like something from the 1870s. It looked like Bedlam, you know, and there was a special ward for the, you know, what they would, this is not very PC, but what they would call in those days, like the dangerously insane, yeah? Not the criminally insane, but the dangerous inmates. And to get to, as I understand it, to get to this ward, if they were cleaning it, for example, my mum and another nurse would open a door, they'd go through the door and lock it behind them. They'd then be like an airlock. They'd open the next door, lock that behind them. So there were two doors behind them. They would then walk up a flight of stairs. At the top of the stairs, another door they would unlock, and then they were in the ward. I mean, how gothic is that to begin with, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The point I'm making is that there is no way anyone could be sneaking up and down past her. You're locking numerous doors on your way up. Now, you've been through these airlock chambers. Picture the ward at the top. It's a wide corridor with 4 or 5 private rooms on each side. What my mum and her colleague would do is they would go around and they would start on either side and they would open every door because they were checking there was no one in the rooms. They didn't want to be up there unaware of someone in the rooms. So they would open every door. Then they would go it together into one room. They'd clean the room. They would shut that door behind them. So they basically knew that no one was up there. And this day, my mum went through all that process when she was a young nurse, went through all of that, went up the stairs, did all of that. They were changing a bed in the room, and they heard every door slam. So they ran out, and all the doors were shut. So they opened them all again. There was no one there. They went back to work. And then, according to my mum, who has no imagination by her own admission, right? They then heard every single door close, but one at a time. So they ran away, basically. My mum was young. Yeah. They ran away. And the kicker of this is that and this is where it ties into session 9. Years later, they were having asbestos ripped out of the hospital. And they had a specialist team in. And the team was up on this ward. And some big burly guy came running down, demanding to see my mum, who was then like the sister on the wall, like head whatever. And she's like, what's the problem? And this guy said to her, who is that old lady up there bothering my lads? And they've been through the exact same process. There was nobody up there. But this guy said there was an old lady walking around looking at them. And there's nothing more to it. That's the story. But I just think it's knowing my mum, who is not the kind of person to make shit up or even think of it or care or think it's anything but laughable. It gives me chills.
Yeah.
I mean, the hair on my back of my neck stood up.
Me too. I was going to say, I don't have a good enough camera for us to verify this, but I literally got like hairs standing up because,
God,
I mean, like yourself, Neil, I was going to say a notorious atheist. Like that is always the default. But when you hear things like that, it's like, how do you explain it? Because I mean, the way that, I generally revert to is like, yeah, that the human brain is very complicated. We can imagine many things. So it is like kind of borderline mental health and just imagination. But it always gets tricky when it would have to then be a joint hallucination.
Yeah.
You've got another person that you're with. So I mean, what is going on there? That is the
And
question.
even if you think, yeah, it's a rogue breeze that has slammed all the doors,
Mm.
the fact that they then shut one at a time,
Yeah.
that, I mean, my mum could be bullshitting me. My mum could be at home laughing herself silly that I'm out in public telling these stories and like a
Yeah.
credulous fool. But I just think it's a great story.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how you hear things like that? I mean, how does that affect your own beliefs? How do you try and rationalize that?
Oh God, I don't know really. I suppose if I was to seriously have a conversation about what we call ghosts or hauntings, um, I think yeah, I think you've got like a pyramid, right? I think a lot of it is misinterpretation. I think a lot of it's confirmation bias. I think there's the whole infrasound thing, where certain degrees of sound can actually evoke hallucinations. I think that's a big part of it. But when it comes down to like two people experiencing something, the only way I can reconcile it within my coldly rational worldview is to think it's got nothing to do with spirits and it's to do with um that you've heard of the stone tape theory, the idea that stone can in some way capture imagery and sort of redeploy it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting worryingly close to using the word energy, which is a pet hate of mine. When people say energy in a vague way, it makes me want to kind of pull my own teeth out. But yeah, I think the only way I can explain something like that is to think maybe there is something about the architecture of the universe we don't understand, but which is mathematically provable under the right conditions. I don't believe in spirits. I don't believe anything of us lingers at all. But I do think there is a chance that there is some physical property of the universe, which means 10 years after my death, I might pop up for 30 seconds on this plane and then disappear, never to be seen again. That's all I can really
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds similar to a lot of my answers to these
Mm,
situations, which must be so frustrating, particularly for religious people who really want me to believe. And I'm like, look,
yeah,
we don't have the science to prove what's happened yet, but there is science to prove what's happened. And it's like,
yeah,
well,
yeah,
you can say that to anything. And it's like, well, I suppose I can, much like you can say, have faith to anything. So we're
mm,
just there's
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
no moving forward.
No,
If
yeah,
we've got these things that we fall back on when we
yeah,
can't essentially prove it. But yeah, just because we can't prove it doesn't mean that it can't be proven.
no, no. It's an utterly redundant conversation, really,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
you're never going to shake either one's belief, are you? It might as well just shake hands and agree to disagree on that.
yeah,
But don't
yeah.
you think
And I
it's
mean,
cool that you don't see ghosts in session 9? I think the coolest
yeah,
thing is that it's not a ghost story. You think it's going to be all the way through, and it never is. It's never a ghost story. That's what I meant at the
yeah,
start when I said I thought it was going to be one kind of movie. I thought it was going to be, Grave Encounters or like I've never seen Gonny Jam Haunted Asylum, but that kind of vibe. I thought it was going to be that, and it's something completely different. It's much more
Mm-hmm.
weird. There's not a
Yeah.
ghost in
yeah.
sight.
Although, is there an argument that Hank possibly sees a ghost or sees something at the point where he discovers the coins and there's a figure or something that walks past or that he sees and it's not necessarily gaudy? I'd have to go back and rewatch it. But yeah, it's so ambiguous as to what he sees at that point. Do you have any readings on that? Do you recall what I'm talking about?
I do, yeah, but I always
Yeah.
thought it was gaudy. I always think it's. I think everything is gaudy in this. I don't think there are any spirits. I think it's. I think you're not supposed to think it's gaudy. You're supposed to think, because I'm trying to cast my mind back to see it for the first time, and I didn't know what the. And I think when I first watched it, I think I assumed that there was an inmate still knocking around there who was, because you get a lot of reaction shots, right? You get a lot of people looking at an assailant, and you assume there is an assailant. And I think I thought there was a physical person living there, because there is that thing about, they always come back. I thought it was that, and I know there was a subplot that was removed where there was supposed to be a homeless woman living in the tunnels beneath Danvers.
Yeah.
And they cut that out because they thought it would confuse people that she may be Mary Hobbs or whatever. So I thought it was a physical threat. I don't think I ever thought it was a ghost story. That's why that final line hits so hard, because that's the first time in the film that I even considered that there was a supernatural sort of realm to this.
Yeah. I feel every kind of flashback and looking, when there's kind of been the reveal that this is Gordy, then we see that Hank sees Gordy, as does every other crew member. But I feel that there's just like a few seconds before, or maybe a minute before, I feel that Hank sees something, but yeah, there's so much ambiguity as to what it is. I wonder, and I really want to go back and watch that bit now. I need to pause it. Like, do we actually see a woman? Is there a figure that is ambiguous but obvious enough to not be Gordy? Because I'm wondering, is that the one bit they kept of this
Interesting.
woman? Because also, I mean, in the original ending, like probably in an original draft, I don't know if they actually shot this, but Gordy was meant to be killed by this woman. It would have completely altered the entire film. So
Oh, right, okay.
then it would have been a supernatural film.
Right.
I wonder what we think about the ending in general, because this has got mixed reviews. Some people really enjoyed it. Some people didn't like the way that it all was, I suppose, in a sense, neatly tied up. But I think maybe people who think it's all neatly tied up are missing multitudes of interpretations. I think linked to that, the other criticism that some reviewers gave was that they felt that the film was slow. They felt that there were times where the pacing was a bit off. And I mean, it's a terribly arrogant or pretentious thing to say, but I can only assume that, some people said that the pacing was a bit aimless and long-winded, and I can only assume that those people missed the point, that
I
they
think those
didn't
people are
get it,
idiots.
which is such a snobbish thing to say. But I feel that every shot, every moment, particularly rewatching it counts. There's nothing really that could have been cut. And so if you think that it was aimless or it was slow, I can only really conclude that you're trying to compare it or think that it's a type of horror film that it isn't, like a slasher, for example.
So I mean, this film these days, right, would just like A24 would like snap this up in a heartbeat. Right? It's an A24 movie, like 20 years
Right.
too soon. And this is another very unpopular opinion now that I'm going to say, but I was bored to tears by The Witch, the Vivitch and all that. I watched a film called It Comes at Night, which strained for Session 9 levels of ambiguity by A24. I couldn't be bothered with it. I didn't really like Hereditary all that much, and these films are being lauded because of their elevation and because they are slow and slow burning and character studies and all that sort of stuff. And I think Session 9 is better than any of them. I think it's doing what they want to do and doing it so well. I just think to come at this film and not like it for the pacing, I just think you must have a very, very reductive idea of what horror is. And if that's a snobby thing to say, I apologize. But, there really is a whole vein of classic horror. Like, Nick Rhodes' Don't Look Now. The haunt, Robert Wise is The Haunting. They revel in this kind of slow baked dread.
Yeah.
So to look at it and go like, that's not a proper horror film. Like you're missing an entire spectrum of horror. I just think if you don't like it, fair enough, but don't say it's a bad horror film because it's slow.
No.
Right. Or even Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
I mean, what you're talking about, what you were saying at the A24, they would have snapped this up. The conditions to make this film are absolutely incredible. Okay. Here's the thing. They got Danvers. You can imagine if you're making a film that you have to get set and you have to get sound stage, you have to get all this stuff. They didn't need none of that stuff. They didn't need absolutely nothing. There's no set involved. David Caruso is on record saying that everything that you see in the film was left there. Almost intentionally. It's like these people just left. He said they didn't have to do anything. They had the perfect atmosphere to make a movie like this. Every single shot in this film is deliberate and intentional. Every cut, every edit, every sound, every single thing in it. If as an independent filmmaker, someone making this film, if they made this film today, you're absolutely right. Blumhouse would walk away from it and A24 would be like, hey, come on down. We got you.
The making of the film would in itself be a massive marketing thing. Can you imagine if they made this now? It would be everywhere. Like, we made this on location. This stuff, we didn't have any set. We made it in because we made it under the difficult conditions. It would itself be a massive, massive marketing agenda. And instead,
you could make a film about the making of the film.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And instead, it's just like, no, here's this little curio that most people don't know about. And it's like, what?
Yeah. And here's the thing. It's like all of that stuff combined made this film that kind of tries to present the question. It doesn't answer anything. It presents the question, because we talk about, hey, is there a ghost in this film? No, there's not. But it broadens the definition of haunted, no doubt. Okay, it is. If you look at it, it's basically, but it focuses on guilt. It focuses on how we try to resolve guilt and how we hide guilt and all that. So, is the building haunted? Is Gordy haunted? Is Simon haunted? Okay, the answer to that question is yes. All of it. And it all combines. I mean, it's like they created this thing, and like I said, you can make a film about the making of it. It's just the more I think about it now, it's just like, this is the greatest film ever fucking made.
It's fascinating though, Bob, that you say about that line about it expands the definition of being haunted, because I think that's something that all the best ghost stories do. And I'm going back now to The Shining and Hill House, and it makes me think, I wonder if this film is more indebted to Hill House than I'd realised, because I hadn't thought about that thing about Gordon coming back to Danvers. But when you think about Shirley Jackson's Hill House, there's all the way through there's that refrain where something is saying to Eleanor, come home. And you think it's her sister who's saying it, because she's abandoned her sister to go to Hill House. And this refrain, come home, come home. And then you realise at the end, the house is saying to Eleanor, come home, come here, And it's the idea of, is the house haunted? Or does Eleanor turn it on? Does she turn some kind of psychic battery in the way that Danny Torrance does? Or is the house just a thing that amplifies the haunting that's already inside Eleanor? And I think you could make a similar point about Session 9, because all of these guys who turn up have got some degree of, I don't like to overuse the word trauma, but they're troubled in every case. There's something going on. Phil, David Caruso's character, his wife or his girlfriend's actually left him for Josh Lucas's character, Hank, which I think is a brilliant little plot point. you know, and it plays on that. Hank's a gambling addict. It plays on that. Gordon, we know, is all kinds of fucked up. So I wonder, to follow up your point about different kinds of haunting, is it doing that? Are they already haunted and it's just some kind of voltage that this building gives them?
Mm-hmm. I think so. And I think that if you look at, you know, what the behind the scenes stuff starts to make sense. You know, we're talking about a building that was built in the 1850s, 1860s, something like that. I mean, shit, Arkham from Lovecraft is based off Danvers.
Yeah.
Okay. Which, I mean, and of course, Arkham, you know, Arkham Asylum and all that kind of stuff. It's all tied together. So, you know, he didn't use Danvers because he wanted to, you know, Lovecraft wanted to create it within his universe. So he called it Arkham, but it's based off Danvers. So, I mean, this thing has history beyond Session 9. And you know, I think that now there's only like one small part of the building that actually exists. I mean, this thing was massive. It held 2,500 people. I think they even mentioned that it had in the movie, and I don't know if it's true or not, it had its own bowling alley.
Yeah.
You know, so that's, you know, movie theater. It was a city.
And its own power station.
Yeah, I mean, it was freaking massive. And I think that today that only one, because of historical preservation, only one small part of it actually exists. And I think it's just a frontage with a new building behind it.
Well,
and I don't know.
It was bought, actually. I'm always a bit reluctant to say this because it's relevant. When I was in Massachusetts, I really considered going and breaking in and doing the whole like urban exploration thing and filming it. And then I just thought to myself, that's a terrible idea, Neil. You've seen the film. You will shit yourself. So I didn't do it. But I did do a lot of research into it. And it was bought out in 2005. And they set about converting it into apartments. And they knocked loads of it down and they kept like the brick structure of the main building. And they were going to convert it into 490 something apartments. And they got 4 done. And there was this weird fire that they've never been able to explain. Now, I don't actually know what was weird about the fire, but every time you read about it, it just says like a weird, inexplicable fire. So even now, there's weirdness attached to this building. You know, like even 2007, that fire happened. So 15 years ago, there was still strange stuff going on. It does feel like one of those just archetypal places that are just meant to not rest easy.
Right. And that's the impression that I'm getting. And that's the impression that they went into with this film. And I think the only person who might have known that was maybe Brad Anderson and the writers and things like that. And he puts this, you know, small crew in this house with this kind of loose story and film, or not a house, but this building, knowing that. And it's like, this is gonna infect it. And it's like you take a fictional story and you get an incredible film out of it.
Yeah.
And I mean, it couldn't have been I think if they would have built a set, it wouldn't have worked right.
No, you can weirdly feel the influence of the place on the performances. In a way that I can't really think of any other film that, well, yeah, obviously a film is never really going to be Blair Witch, I suppose. Blair Witch is something not dissimilar. You put people in a situation and let them get uncomfortable.
Right.
And I love Blair Witch. That's another film that evokes that same kind of weird dread. In fact, there's a lot more. I'd never thought about how kind of similar these two films are, actually. It's not. There's a lot of connective tissue between Blair Witch and Session 9.
There is.
I need to think about that more. There's probably an essay in that somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we're mentioning so many films and stories that I now want to rewatch or possibly even unbox. So we're like spiraling off into different directions. And I mean, I know that Don't Look Now was a direct influence, and there's so many parallels between Don't Look Now and Session 9. And
that makes sense, but I didn't know that. That does make sense.
Yeah. But one thing we haven't touched on, and I know that, you know, we're coming up to the time that we have together, is the soundtrack and just sound in the way that it is masterfully used to evoke this dread. And I mean, of course, you've got the soundtrack from, I believe they're called Climax Golden Twins, and a lot of it is just like piano keys, discordant piano keys, but then, you know, in very much a Silent Hill way. And I think sound is how this like really does bring to mind Silent Hill too, because you've got radio static, you've got like water dripping, you've got power generators and static electricity, and it's just so well used. And like, you know, that means that there can be stretches where there's no dialogue at all for quite a substantial amount of time, but because you've got the sound, you wouldn't notice that no one's saying anything. In a really, really subtle way they use sound is, you know, any time that they're talking using their radio system, there's that little bit of radio static. And there's one point where Gordy is talking to Phil, and there's no radio static, and that's because he's not talking to Phil. That's because he's gone absolutely fucking insane. This is the kind of level that they're doing things on. Like, I need to rewatch this again because, you know, I mean, I said like I've only watched it two times now, but you know, in that second viewing, I noticed so much more. So,
well, you watched it very well because I haven't picked up on half of this stuff. I've clearly watched it really lazily. Yeah,
I didn't pick up that at all. I still have another 24 hours on my rental.
Yeah,
I might watch it tonight again.
You should. Yeah. Was there no way that you could buy it? But just because like this film is so good. It's like,
you know, here's the thing. I believe that I have it on Blu-ray. The problem is I don't know where I have it.
Yeah.
And so, and I looked at it, and my roommate collects movies, and I asked him, I said, "Hey, do you have Session 9?" This is funny. And so he's like, "Yeah, I think I know where it's at." And he's, you know, in his movie area in the living room, and then he comes back and hands me a Blu-ray of District 9. And I'm like, "Nope, good film, wrong movie." No. And he goes, "Oh yeah, you do." He goes, "I don't think I have Session 9." He goes, "You might," but I'm like, "Shit, dude, I have no idea where it's at. It's in a box somewhere."
Yeah.
So I'm like, "I'll just rent it." You know, so I'm good. Good thing that we were clear on Session 9, because we'd be talking about a totally different great film.
Can you imagine if me and Neil are talking about Session 9 and you're talking about District 9? Yeah. And we're trying to make arguments that is possibly the scariest movie of all time. And you're like, I don't know. I don't know about that.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I mean, do you think that Session 9 is the scariest movie of all time? Can we think of a movie that is scarier?
I don't think it's all that scary in the way that it doesn't leave me feeling uncomfortable afterwards. It doesn't leave me, well, I suppose it does leave me unsettled, but I enjoy it. And films that really scare me, I tend to not enjoy. I tend to not want to think about them or talk about them. Like I have a weird relationship with horror movies. I do think it's one of the most dread-inducing films of all time, but I think they're different things. You know, I mean, what I will tell you is there is one scene in this film that now I love to watch for like its technical prowess. And I watched it quite recently. When I watched it last week with my wife, who's terrified of horror movies. And I had to promise her there are no jump scares because she can't handle a jump scare at all. But she can handle long scenes of dread as long as she knows there is no jump scare coming. And then, you know, the scene, is it Jeff when he's in the tunnel and the lights go out? Is it Jeff, the character?
I think so.
Yeah.
And he's just kind of like trying to get out of the tunnel. And everything about the way the film is made is telling you there is going to be a jump scare. We've been watching for like an hour and 10 minutes by this point. This is where it's going to go off the Richter. It's going to scare the shit out of you. it's going to be the final big reveal of what's going on, and it never comes. And I was watching it for like the fourth time, and I was still thinking, oh God, is there a jump scare? Because if there is, my wife is going to leave me. So part of me was relieved that there wasn't, but the tension never dissipates in that scene. Like, it's one of the most frightening scenes I've ever watched the first time, because you're waiting for the mother of all like screams, and it just doesn't happen. He just runs away into the dark, and it ends, and that is some ballsy filmmaking, right? To put that in a horror movie and just not give the audience the kind of money shot, like that is some real auteur shit.
Yeah. Jeff is such a tragic character because, I mean, he's perhaps the purest of all the men, Others are kind of haunted by demons, probably not literally, possibly literally for Gordy. But, Jeff has not done... He's not really done anything wrong apart from occasionally listen to his heavy metal a little bit too loud, which doesn't really deserve what happens to him. But then, I mean, talking about subverting expectations, I mean, he's out of the Danvers. He's out of the Danvers and eating some sweet confectionery, maybe a cookie. I can't quite remember what it is. And then he, in a conventional film, because you're out of the building, you should have escaped at this point. But he, he sees his uncle Gordy coming towards him. He's apologizing for the fact that he had to get out. And we just see his reaction to seeing Gordy. It's interesting that Jeff is so innocent that he doesn't even seem to react that Gordy is covered in blood and is holding like this lobotomy pick. I did wonder if that was a little bit too much. It's like, look, even if, like, it's someone that I trust, even if it's Bob, if Bob's covered in blood and he's holding the lobotomy pick, I might want to back up. Whoa, Bob, what are you doing with that? This doesn't look good. But he stands there up until the moment that he ain't standing anywhere.
Yeah.
One of the scenes that stand out to me more than all the others, and every time I see it, it has an ick factor, is when Gordy takes the lobotomy probe out of Josh Lucas's head.
Yeah.
And his head pulls up.
Yeah.
Kind of, does that, and then his head hits the ground.
Mm.
And there's nothing gory about it. I mean, I don't even think there's any blood. It's just a fact that he's just holding his head up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, that's some serious fucking ick right there. That's an icky fucking scene.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that when Jeff is out, he is so glad to be out that he doesn't. I think he doesn't even realize that Gordy is covered in blood. I think that it's like it doesn't even cross his mind. And when you have that kind of adrenaline, so that's just, I don't know. It's to me, those scenes, those reveals are a grounded interpretation of someone being infected by Simon. That's the way I see that. In other words, like, hey, I'm not gonna give you any supernatural at this point right now, because I'm saving that to the last line.
Yeah.
I'm gonna give you a grounded view of this, and that's the way I see those reveals. Is they're very grounded. It makes it, and of course, the psychological. Wake up. Phil keeps telling him to wake up. That's inside his head. The phone calls to his wife, those are inside, they're inside his head. We're seeing a very grounded thing that's deliberate. That's the takeaway of this right here. If you're a storyteller, the skillful misdirection in this movie is off the fucking charts from the get-go. And if you can put that into a story and you can work it into prose, then man, you've got literary gold right there.
Yeah.
That's I want to learn how to do that kind of skillful misdirection.
Yeah. No, quite
Yeah.
right.
I'm just so glad that they deleted all those supernatural scenes, that they got rid of the ending where Gordy was, killed by this entity, because I don't think we'd be talking about it.
No.
I think, yeah, it would be a film that had like a good location, but it wouldn't have the staying power. It wouldn't hold up as it does today. And I mean, probably we can delve deeper into it if we look into like further interviews. But I wonder what were the conversations like, or who decided to get rid of those supernatural elements? Because I mean, in terms of making money, it's almost like suicide. It's like, in terms of trying to make it commercial, then you'd probably want those tedious, spoon fed supernatural scenes. But in terms of actually creating art, in terms of evoking dread and scaring people, even though Neil might argue against that one, then you needed to get rid of the supernatural elements. So whoever made that decision, then yeah, hats off to them. But it's interesting that there are deleted scenes, so it went as far as for them to actually film a more supernatural version.
Yeah. But it's like you said before about the ending and how it went down with people and what we think of it. And you can tell that this film is being made around the time that Nolan was making Memento, and Donnie Darko, and other 90s films that I can't think of, where
Right.
there was kind of like a neat, it all, by the end, it's a puzzle. There were those films. There was a real trend for like puzzle box movies around the turn of the millennium. And I like that this plays those games, but never, solves the puzzle. It's a metaphor I use quite a lot for stories of this kind. I always say, like, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, but rather than not having enough pieces, it's got one too many pieces. So there's always a bit left. There's always a bit that can't be reconciled within the logic. And I think it feels like one kind of neat kind of student movie where I've got a cool idea but it's not. It's got the real courage of its conviction. It doesn't need to resolve itself at the end. And I think that's why it's a cult movie, like you say, Michael. I think that's why we're still talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that analogy as well about the jigsaw and one too many pieces. And yeah, that's why so many horror films, so many dark thrillers hold up, because there's always that little unresolved question or element. And I think actually, like, we talk about storytelling lessons. That's probably like the great kind of takeaway. It's like, obviously you want to wrap up most of the questions, because otherwise the reader or the viewer is going to be completely unsatisfied, and they're not going to be convinced either that you knew what the hell you were doing. It's like, do you have an answer? But if you can give the reader or the viewer nearly everything, but you can leave that one element, now you've got an enduring piece of art. Now you've got something people are going to keep talking about.
Yeah.
Well,
sorry, guys. My one storytelling takeaway from this is that there is nothing as useful for a compelling story as a kind of a structure that you can put into a story that seems organic. And by that I mean the 9 sessions, these 9 tapes. Like, if it was one big reveal, that's fine. But by taking such an ambiguous story and putting this spine of these 9 tapes, it means that anytime that they don't know what to do with the story, play another tape, reveal something. Anytime you need to get from scene A to scene B and you don't quite know how to make that transition, use the tape. It's a built-in sort of propulsion that is also inherently important to the story. And I think if anyone can ever come up with anything like that, where it's like, oh, what are these documents that we're going to slowly unravel as the story progresses, I am always in hook, line, and sinker. That is a key to my heart.
Right. In a way, there's a little bit of misdirection with the sessions because, of course, in more conventional filmmaking, you see these sessions, and you're like, okay, whatever is on session 9, that is the most horrendous, the most messed up tape of all. And I mean, of course, to a point it is, but it's like if it, you'd be missing the horror if you were to just be waiting for that, because actually the real horror is what's happening with Gordy and what's happening right now. So there is quite a lot of misdirection by putting this weight on Mary and the sessions, whereas what's happening is the horror is not of the past, it's actually of the present. But we see misdirection throughout. I mean, there's that horrible story that is told really near the beginning, where
Patricia,
one of the characters yeah
oh yeah, I can't remember her name, but yeah, sorry Mike, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, I think that the name is Patricia. It's this 10-year-old girl who was raped by her father. Then, like, it turned into this group orgy with her entire family. The baby's heart is cut out, and it's obviously riffing on the satanic panic of the 80s. And so you're hearing all of this messed up stuff, and then, like, the kind of punchline, as it were, is like, oh well, it all turned out to be a lie, and the family countersued her. But yeah, I mean, in a way, like, that part is like the absolute darkest of comedic moments. Like, I mean, if you went to a stand-up set and they pulled that joke, you'd be like, yeah, I think it's a bit much. But this is like the kind of level of misdirection that they're going to give you. And I think at that point, yeah, you're seeing that this is an unreliable narrator, because in a sense this is Gordy's story, but Gordy is the evil.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously there are many things that we could talk about, that we could continue to talk about. I mean, we haven't even mentioned too that, like, a part of this, and particularly Gordy murdering his wife because effectively she, like, overboiled the pasta, was inspired by this Richard Rosenthal case where a guy murdered his wife because she accidentally burnt his dinner. And then he cut out her heart and lungs and put them in his backyard on a stake. So holy fucking shit. But are there any points before we wrap up that either of you want to bring up? Is there anything that either of you don't like about the story, or that you think were missed opportunities, or that they got wrong?
Bob?
No, I mean, I'm the more I see it, the more I enjoy it, and I think that's the power of good filmmaking. Is that you can always, and it is like what Neil was saying. There's a piece of a puzzle. It's like you have a jigsaw. You've got too many pieces. You can kind of move some pieces around and try to make things fit. But at the end, you're like, okay, something is unsettling about this, and I love that. And that's, to me, that is the essence of dread and what we're trying to fucking do here, man. So it's like, I love it.
There are certain shots that I don't like. There's certain lines, but my thing about this film is it feels such a uniquely sort of lucky piece of alchemy. Like everything's just come together to make this thing. That even though there may be some tiny minor things I would do differently, I don't want to touch it because I don't know what would break it. I don't know, but by changing one thing, are you going to break every? You know what I mean? It feels like this perfectly poised thing that has happened, like the happiest, the darkest miracle, the happiest accident, and let's just leave it alone because touching it may ruin it.
Yeah. Well, Neil, thank you so much for joining us to discuss session 9. Of course, you're mostly podcasting at Talking Scared. So, I mean, what can people expect in terms of future episodes? And is there anything that you wanted to talk about or to mention in terms of your own projects before we sign off here?
Not really. It's kind of more of the same from me, really. By the time this goes live, I will have released my Stephen King episode, which is the first time I've ever said those words out loud on a mic. I'm still a little bit terrified my computer's going to die and I'm going to lose the file and it won't happen. But touch wood, if everything goes to plan, that will have been released by now. And I'll just tell you some of the, because I don't know when this is going out exactly, but I'll tell you some recent guests that have been on the show to give like potential listeners an idea of who I talked to. I spoke to Chuck Tingle about Camp Damascus. I spoke to Stephen King. I spoke to Sadie Hartman, Mother Horror, Cat Ward, and then coming up later in the year, people like Clay McLeod Chapman, Chuck Wendig, Liz Hand, who's taken us back to Hill House, Tanana Reeve Do. I've recorded a special winter episode with Michelle Paver, and then going into the new year, I have plans for other ventures. I'm going to try and write a non-fiction book. I haven't told anyone that yet. I'm going to try and write a non-fiction book about horror. And if that comes together, I may have to take a few short weeks off the podcast. But other than that, it's going to go on and on and on into the future. I have no plans to stop anytime soon.
Awesome. Do you have anything that you can say about this non-fiction book?
Well, I'm pulling together a pitch at the minute. I mean, we are in the absolute earliest stages. I would love to. The phrase I keep using is I want to write the horror literature version of a popular science book, where I want to write something that is informed and hopefully articulate and hopefully insightful, but not dry. I don't want to go back to my old academia days of talking about Derrida and people like that, because that way lies madness and a lack of friends. I want to talk more about the stuff we love, but perhaps bring the sort of talking scared, very deep dive perspective, and look at it and look at horror in a few themes that perhaps haven't been looked at enough in recent sort of critical writing. That's the idea. So I'm going to be pitching that far and wide, and we'll see what happens with it. Maybe nothing, but who knows? We'll give it a go.
All right. Well, fingers crossed. And we are all very excited to hear the conversation with Stephen King. And I love the way that when you said it, and, for people who watch the video version, like, you were so blasé, like, oh, well, we got the conversation with Steve. Like, you're fucking excited, but you pulled it off. So, like, oh, had a bit of a chat with Uncle Stevie, as you fucking do. Then
I think that's a result of
just typical day.
I think that's my face. I've been carrying wardrobes up and down stairs all day. Trust me, I am. Yeah. I was not cool when I spoke to him. Put it that way. I was not cool. Yeah, no, I love the show and I love all the guests I talk to. It's just great to talk about horror every week. It's a privilege to have the chance to talk to, everyone in the Haunted Bookshop every week. I love it, and hopefully long may it continue. And I need to be more flexible in booking guests in the future, because I've one thing I've learned this year is I've overbooked out of an anxiety that no one would want to come and talk to me, and I want to be more flexible because there's stuff I've missed that I don't want to miss in the future.
You just got to do what you can and not berate yourself for what you can't do. I feel that is kind of the curse of what we're doing here. But I know that a lot of people will be excited to hear that, Talking Scared is here to stay. I know we have a lot of crossover listeners, and I mean, I think this is Horror and Talking Scared. They complement each other very well. I mean, even though we sometimes have the same guests, considering, that our field, it's remarkable how many months can go by and we haven't had a single crossover guest. That is testament to this great era of horror fiction that we're living in.
And what's brilliant that you guys do, I mean, I'm not, this is not sycophancy, this is true. I mean, I've been listening to you guys for years before I even considered having a podcast. I get to listen less now because I'm too frightened sometimes to listen to you guys because I don't want to ask the same question. But what you guys do that's great, and a great compliment to what I do, is you have such kind of like long ranging conversations. You get these authors to commit to talking to you for like 3-4 hours, and I feel a real anxiety when I speak to authors. I'm like, right, it's a tight hour, I don't want to keep you here, and often it is very, very driven by the latest release. But you guys kind of fill in all the backstory and thoughts on things that got even nothing to do with books they write, or not even books at all, and it's a really rich sort of bedrock for people like me to then come along and go, okay, this is horror. I've done all of that. I could just look at this book. And I think that is a really nice tandem in which we kind of find ourselves working. Because I love listening to your like long-winded conversations. I love it. Like, there's things that I would never think to ask.
No, I'm not afraid to ask a very personal question. Even to people like Dean Koontz, and it's like, shit, did he just ask him that? It's like, why not? But you're absolutely right in the way that we complement each other in that way, that like, we're doing a This Is Your Life, and you're doing like the most kind of thoughtful, deep dive literary analysis of the latest book. And of course we didn't plan it that way, but I'm just so glad that it worked out like that. And so I suppose in that way, even if we do listen to each other's episodes, then there's less chance of us like accidentally spoiling our own conversation. But it's good to kind of listen to your podcast after we've recorded that then there's no way that it can mess it up, because particularly if somebody tells an anecdotal amazing story and then it's like, oh, I gotta react organically, but I already heard this, I'm talking scared.
Whereas I love, like, if I have a guest on that I haven't perhaps read all of their stuff, like you did a great series episode with Laird Barron. I don't know when that was from. And I am hoping to get Laird on the show soon, and I haven't got time in my reading schedule to read everything Laird's written, because there's a lot of it, and I love to go and listen to you guys, and you like I say, you give me such a bedrock. I understand his work, even if I've not read it all. It's a good place from which to start, So basically, you're doing like fellow podcasters and interviewers a real service, guys, and it's always a pleasure speaking to you.
Yeah, well, right back at you. So, and thank you to our listeners for listening to this one. We will catch you in the next episode. So if you're not already, do subscribe to Talking Scared. And until then, have a great day.